again, everybody. It's been quite a while since we've had Wednesday Thoughts, but Carolina and I got together and thought we would do one for you today. She's behind the camera, I'm in front of it. Believe me, I'm sure you wish it were reversed, that you were seeing her, not me, but here I am. So I'm here today to talk about a situation that came, not a situation, but a Facebook post I saw earlier in the week that stimulated some thought, and I like when that happens. I like when I'm provoked to think about things differently. And it was posted by my dear friend, Facebook friend, and friend in general, Karen, where Karen posted a story about a fictional church in which different visitors came into the church and they ruffled the feathers of the sort of traditional church members who didn't like some of the things about the visitors. For example, a gay couple came in and some people didn't like it, so they went to the pastor and said, "You need to do something." And the pastor says, "Well, I don't know what to say." Other people would come in, some who were unkempt, probably a bit dirty, and some of the church members says, "You have to do something about this, pastor." And the pastor says, "I don't know what to say." And it goes on with any number of different visitors, and the pastor repeatedly says, "I don't know what to say." So in the story, one of the church members says, "Here's what you need to say, pastor. You need to say that Jesus accepted all people, that Jesus was unconditional in Jesus' love toward people, and that we need to be that way in the church." And I thought, that's good. Absolutely. What that church needed was a wake-up call. They were way too law and orderly. They wanted everything to be just right, just so, and if anything departed sort of from the typical, that something had to be done, to be brought back into order. And so I was thinking about that pastor in particular. The pastor who, by all appearances, didn't know what to say. And I'm not here to defend that pastor because it's a fictional story. There is no such pastor. But to give a little perspective that might be different and a different way of taking that story that I think would be beneficial. I think it never happened to me, but I think all pastors in some way were read their Miranda rights when they went from seminary out into the churches. You know, you've seen it on TV. The cops arrest a criminal and they say, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." And pastors learn over time that anything we say can and will be used against us. And often we remain silent. But maybe this guy wasn't so silent. Maybe there was more to this than meets the eye. And I'm here today to speak, to say, well, I kind of know what I would say, though I don't know what that pastor should have said. And I would say this, the church was way out of balance. I've been there so many times where people say, "Oh, we had those people, they came in the church and they didn't do things the way we like. We have to do something about it." And your heart just breaks because you're always so happy to have people come into the church and you're not judgmental. All people are welcome. And I think that church needed to be brought back into some kind of balance to say, yes, we have to have things kept and orderly, but we also have to make room for other perspectives. And rather than being so rigid, we have to be flexible and be welcoming and be kind. Because Jesus was like that, and it's good to be reminded of that. I was thinking about how balance is what I would say to all of this. To say, yes, we need order, but yes, we also need to embrace all people who come. And remember that from time to time. There was a book written last century by a very famous psychologist named Erich Fromm. Erich Fromm wrote the book, The Art of Loving. And he analyzed all the different forms of love and how they play themselves out in human existence. And one of the things he pointed out was, throughout human history, it is human nature for there to be two different poles, two different tensions of how love actually functions. He said there's motherly love. Motherly love to him was love that is unconditional. Love that loves because another person exists. It's caring, it's comforting, it's kind, it's flexible, it's gentle. But there's also the other kind of love at the other pole called the fatherly love. Fatherly love is conditional. It expects things to be done and to be done right. It doesn't just coddle, it also challenges. And he said, actually, to hold those two in balance and to understand that both are necessary is what it means to grow and to be a mature person, such that the mature grown-up will have both forms of love operating in his or her life and in his or her head. And so you can't have too much of one and too little of the other, that both are necessary. He said, if all we had was fatherly conscience, we would become harsh and inhuman. But if all we had was motherly conscience, nothing would really develop. People would not grow. They would stay in a sort of infantile stage. And so both need to be held. Not too much of one, not too much of the other. Because in order for a person to function, in order for a church to function, in order for our world to function, he said, we need both. And we need to hold them in tension. We need to hold them in balance. And that church needed balance. It was way too fatherly, shall we say. It needed motherly love. This is an age-old predicament and tension that people have recognized. Recently, there was a study done in Finland. Finland, they were curious about the effects of sort of a social justice mindset that was very American, but was starting to permeate other cultures throughout the world. Some people call it the wokeness. And so they wanted to discover in Finland exactly what this dynamic was, how it played out in people's lives, the effects it had, which people were more inclined toward it, and which people were repulsed by it. And so they studied 5,000 people, and they asked them a lot of different questions about life and their perspective on compassion, on order, law and order, and so forth. And they discovered an interesting thing that shocked the researchers, that it was very much differentiated, the results, according to gender. They discovered that 3 out of 5 women were highly inclined toward a compassionate social justice mindset and orientation. And they were shocked to discover that only 1 out of 7 men were so inclined. And so they didn't form judgments. They didn't say, well, one's right and one's wrong. They said, now, isn't it interesting? We didn't go looking for this, but this is what we found. We found that there is definitely a very different perspective people have, based very much on their gender and then how they see life. That Facebook post that I was telling you about, I looked at the people who liked it. They were all women. And I thought, well, of course, absolutely. And because in so many cases, churches can be so male-dominated that they can be male and fatherly and challenging and rigid and orderly, and they forget the compassion. And so I'm glad that those women liked it. It's a way of saying we need balance in all of this. Fromm said in his book, he was a Jewish man, and so he was well-versed in the Old Testament scriptures, where he said the promised land, the land that God promised to the Israelites, he said was filled with milk and honey. And he said a promised land, the way things should be both milk and honey. And he equated milk with mother's milk, the gentle, compassionate, caring, tender, nurturing, motherly aspect to society, but it also needs honey in the promised land. And honey is something that doesn't come to you. You have to go out into the world to get it. And you have to risk the danger of all the bees. And in the process of doing all of that, you acquire the sweetness of honey that you would never have if you didn't leave home, go out into the world, risk the danger, and acquire it. And so life needs to be in the promised land, both milk and honey, the both, the balance, he said. And I think we can learn from that ancient wisdom of the ancient Israelites, of Fromm and others, that we need balance in our lives and in our churches. About 10 years ago, I was in Illinois visiting my father, who still lives there, and a relative of a relative in Illinois invited me, it was harvest time, late October, early November, to go ride with him in his combine through his cornfields as they harvested the corn. An incredible experience I had to see how they did it. The guy liked company, because being out there in the cornfields, he liked to talk and converse. And so I went out there with him and had that experience of harvesting corn. And while we were riding, he asked me this. He said, "Are you a grace person or a truth person?" And I thought, well, I said, "You're going to have to elaborate." He said, "Well, last week in church, the pastor preached a sermon. He said that Jesus was filled with grace and truth. And he said the pastor explained in the sermon that some of us are inclined toward grace, unconditional love, being constantly forgiving, being nurturing and so forth, while others are inclined toward truth. Truth is kind of hard. You know, sometimes the truth hurts. This is the way it is. You got to buck up and so on." And the pastor was encouraging people to take a look at themselves to see which way they were oriented in their thinking. Are they a grace person or a truth person? And be more aware of how they live their lives and try to bring those two into balance, which is the way Jesus lived, with both grace and truth. And I thought about that. And I thought to myself, now I've been a pastor a little while, and I have to believe that there's a backstory to that perhaps in that church, people were becoming too much of one and too little of the other, and the pastor was simply trying to draw them into this ancient wisdom of the ancient Israelites, milk and honey, of the life of Jesus, grace and truth. And I think we need from time to time to remind ourselves of that ancient wisdom. It's human nature to be too much of one and too little of the other. I think one of the maddest I've ever seen a parishioner of mine be is when there was a man in one of my first churches who said to me, "I don't believe women should have the right to vote. They vote with their heart, not with their head. And that's what's ruining our society. What do you think about that, Pastor?" And I'm thinking, do I know what to say? Do I have the right to remain silent? I said, "I'm sorry, but I don't agree with you. I think both are necessary." And he didn't like that. And I've always thought that people tend to be very much one or the other, and they think their way is right and the other way is wrong. Obviously, he thought there's only one way, the harsh way, the fatherly way, the challenging way, rather than the comforting way. And I think we need both. I was thinking about how, from other ancient wisdom outside of the Bible, how this has been recognized and taught throughout human history. In ancient China, about 2,500 years ago or so, they came up with, and you've probably seen this before, the yin-yang symbol, that truly the right way to live is for dark and light to be in harmony. The male and the female to be in harmony, for there to be both grace and truth. And the dark side here is the yin side, known as sort of the feminine side. It's still, it's quiet, it's comforting, it's soft. And within the dark side, there's also a little bit of the light side, which is to say nothing is absolute. That there's a little bit of the opposite inside the dark side. But also in the white side, there is the male aspect to life and to the universe and to the world and to human nature. It needs to be held in balance. And this is more challenging. This is more assertive. This is more thought-oriented and so forth. And the ancient Chinese said, you need to see these as necessary in all of our mindset, and in all of our lives, and in all of our institutions, and in our society. They need to be held in balance. And you notice how it's a wiggly line, which symbolizes flow, that it's never a still. kind of a balance and harmony. It's always in flux. People have to be generally thinking about how they are acting, how they are being, how they are thinking, and how they are getting along together, and adapt and keep things in balance and flow. And what I'm saying today, and this is not wishy-washy. I know some people would say, be one or the other. And I'm saying, no, you have to be both. We need both grace and truth. We need both yin and yang in our own heads and in our churches. Both, I think, are completely necessary, and both need to be held in balance. So was that pastor in that Facebook post wishy-washy? Perhaps. But perhaps he was thinking the way I'm thinking now, to say it's not so simple as to take a position one way or the other, but to simply remain in balance and to see the value in both aspects and try to hold them in flow and hold harmony together in the church. That church from the Facebook page definitely needed to be brought into balance. But I've seen churches the other way that are way too comforting. And people sometimes need to be challenged. And so we do that in the church. And so I conclude with one of the favorite passages of people from the prophet Micah, where Micah the prophet says, "What does God require of you, O mortal, O human being? It is to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God." And do justice. Justice is mishpat in Hebrew, which means kind of law and order. So live with law and order, but also love kindness. And kindness is a word chesed in Hebrew, which means steadfast love, unconditional love, compassion that does not end. And they're all held in balance by walking humbly with God. And if we're humble about our interactions with each other and how we live and how we do church, we'll hold things, I think, better in balance. And that's what we all need. And so I wish you well. I urge you to hold things in balance, to take a look at yourself. Are you more grace? Are you more truth? And could you stand a little balance and understand this is just the way human nature works? It's not all one, it's not all the other, and it's pretty tough to change people who are all one or all the other, but to encourage one another to hold in balance and listen to each other and walk humbly with God. We'll see you again sometime soon. Thanks to Carolina for her good work in recording and posting these. Bye now.